Gosh, us humans sure are funny little critters, huh? You know, we love to separate and organize things into nice, neat little boxes, like I am me, you are you, we're both humans, but we're different from one another, and all this outside of us, all this other stuff here, this is nature, this is separate, you know? We think that everything on this planet exists independently and separate from one another, and in our classic Darwinian style of thought, we assume that all life on this planet, or in forests like these, are some super hyper-competitive system where everything is trying to outcompete the other in order to survive, which in a way is a reflection of our very individualistic perception of our role in society, when in reality, this perceived separation isn't the case at all. In fact, it's quite the opposite, and as it turns out, there's a lot that we as a society can learn from forests like these. See, everything here is interconnected and dependent on one another in some real tangible ways. Trees like these western red cedars here, big leaf maple and sword fern in the understory here are connected to one another through an arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi in the soil that transports nutrients back and forth between them when they're in need, so they all work together to survive and thrive. So during the winter months, when the maple doesn't have any leaves on it and it can't photosynthesize, the cedar here will supply it with the nutrients it needs so it has enough energy to survive the cold. And then in the summer months, the maple reciprocates that by sending the cedar nutrients when its big leaves are out photosynthesizing, while also shading the understory to retain moisture levels for these water-loving cedars and sword fern here. And then when those leaves drop again in the fall, they provide the building blocks to numerous fungi and insects that decompose them and help form the soil that everything here roots in. But it doesn't just end there. Somehow, and we don't know how exactly, but these older trees like these western red cedars here seem to be able to recognize their own offspring and actively send them nutrients to survive, forming generations of familial ties between species that adds to rich diversity of tree species at different ages, which creates intact ecological function in these forests and makes them more resilient to disturbances like disease and wildfire. These maples carry super thick mats of epiphytes like mosses and ferns that help them store, retain, and regulate water flow. And all of this diversity in the understory here, from rich mats of mosses to all the ferns and stuff, helps regulate the water flow and reduce the impacts of droughts, floods, erosion, and sedimentation of streams so that salmon can migrate up them to spawn, bringing oceanic nutrients like nitrogen up with them that are carried deep into the forest by bears and other scavengers to help fertilize the soils for everything here to grow. Way up there in the canopy, there are certain species of lichen that are a symbiotic partnership between fungi and a photosynthesizing bacteria or cyanobacteria that work together, synthesizing atmospheric nitrogen and returning that to the forest floor to help the very trees they live in survive. When there's a disturbance like a landslide or a flood in riparian areas like this one here, red alders work in those poor soil conditions to fix nitrogen through their partnership with bacteria they house in their roots, which they return to the forest floor as rich green leaves that build soil and provide nutrients to all the other species that will follow. See, these forests aren't simply individual trees fighting one another to live. You know, everything here depends on one another, working with reciprocity for the betterment and well-being of literally everything here. When we simplify these complex ecosystems through clear-cut logging or development, we lose all of that diversity of species that helps create that ecological function. Even-age stands of similar tree species all compete for limited nutrients with fewer of those lichen in the trees, the lack of nitrogen from alders, and the missing social bonds between generations of different species that help them all survive. Additional erosion and sedimentation of streams fractures trophic webs and creates a host of larger ecological issues that makes these forests more susceptible to wildfire, drought, disease, landslides, and other factors that further hinder the survival of these species. These types of forests sure aren't healthy, nor are they happy, because all life on this planet has evolved to live with other life in diverse ecosystems, ourselves included. See, just like a healthy forest ecosystem, societies function best with diversity. Different ideas, thoughts, beliefs, roles, functions, etc. Everything and everyone has a place here, with no one being better than another. And the more diversity we have, the more able we are to adapt to changes that come our way. Monocultures of trees are not natural nor healthy, and neither are monopolies that control industry and limit people's choices. Certain groups of people alienating and oppressing other groups of people, or monolithic thoughts or ideas upheld in society by our ruling classes. Yet, our society seems to constantly push for these sorts of things because they're viewed as easier to manage, safer, more efficient, or economically cheaper. Just as arrogant forestry practices seek to remove deciduous trees because they're seen as detrimental to the growth of conifers, the powers that be try to divide our society across arbitrary values when in reality, it's the difference between all of us that makes us stronger. It doesn't matter what your skin color may be, your background, race, religion, gender, job, who you vote for, who you choose to love, or what you put in your body. At the end of the day, we are all united by our differences, and it's those differences that makes our society stronger, more resilient, and more adaptable in a changing world. We will never be able to tackle issues as daunting as climate change until we're able to address these larger systemic issues, until we abolish racism, classism, misogyny, bigotry, or division of any kind, regardless of whether you're indigenous or settler, a land defender or tree faller, liberal or conservative. We all need to exercise some empathy and compassion towards one another, to have really difficult conversations, and to see and learn from new perspectives regardless of whether or not we agree, without alienating, unfollowing, excluding folks, or even worse. Collectively, we need to exercise some humility and realize that regardless of which box you fit yourself into, we're all just a bunch of raving, self-absorbed, anthropocentric speciesists who continue to think that we are somehow above or not a part of this natural world. Only then can we finally accept that we are all Homo sapiens, just one species of 3 trillion on this planet, and that each one of us has a role to play within our society and these ecosystems that is equally as important as, the moss on the ground here, these ferns here, or these cedar trees. We always have been and always will be active parts of these ecosystems, not apart from them, and we ultimately need to respect all life on this planet equally, because it's what makes all of this possible. So, instead of making assumptions and drawing boxes around people without understanding the whole of them and separating our world into parts that we assume don't interact or depend on one another, let's embrace the fact that despite our differences, we all depend on each other in order to build a world in which we can all not only survive in, but thrive in.